March 2014, the annexation of Crimea and the start of the major pressures on Russia's economy. For the first time in the post-Soviet era, Western countries imposed sanctions against Russia. Top state-run companies and banks were cut off from Western capital markets. Russia's economy was slowing down even before, but the Crimea factor and slumping oil prices made things worse. As one of the world's top investors, Warren Buffett, said about economic crises, "You never know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out." Russia's economy is naked because of its dependency on revenue from oil and gas exports. Oil is Russia's most important export, and crude prices have fallen by more than 40%, and the rouble has lost around half of its value so far this year against the US dollar, despite the efforts of Russia's central bank. That's had a huge impact on the ruble savings of millions of people. Consumption, which has been the main growth driver in Russia over the past decade, is now slumping. There's also been huge capital flight. Russians who could get their cash out of the country did so, as the finance minister accepted.
The EU and USA put up capital inflow barriers for us everywhere, which is costing us about $40 billion a year. This is a huge number, obviously. But if we look at the whole capital outflow that we had before, we had around $100 billion so far this year, and now it could be as much as $130 billion.
In August, the empire struck back, banning the import of many foods from the US and the European Union. Between 30 and 40% of food in Russia was imported. Inflation jumped to double digits in just a month, and overall inflation neared 10% by year's end. Even though, for Europe as a whole, the effect of Moscow's counter-sanctions was not as deep as predicted, some countries and sectors were badly hit. There were protests by farmers who destroyed or gave away produce that would have been heading east. Gas was also in the arsenal of economic weapons. Russia, the EU's biggest gas supplier, turned to a new partner, China, and turned away from a pipeline which was supposed to bring gas to Eastern and Southern Europe. The EU and Russia remain economically linked, but the future of that relationship depends deeply on political issues, particularly Ukraine.
We should come to a new order in this region, which is located today between Russia and the European Union, to finalize border lines, the various sovereignty questions, ethnic tensions, and so on, and then we could build on that basis.
Western leaders said sanctions would be lifted and confidence restored when Moscow reconsidered its policy on Ukraine. The answer was clear.
The sanctions were not just an emotional reaction of the US or its allies to our position regarding the events and the coup in Ukraine or the so-called Crimea Spring. I'm sure that if none of this had happened, they would have invented some other reason to contain Russia's growing power.
So for Russia and Europe, a new year, and it seems a new Cold War. This time, economic hostilities.